So hello and welcome. My name's Steve Pugh, if we don't know each other. I have something called the Growth Strategy Podcast, which is what this is, and what I try and do is introduce you to interesting people that I believe can help you with your business or career. Today I'm speaking to Rob Baker from Tailored Thinking, who's got a very good, interesting job title actually, which we're going to touch on as well. And what we're here to do is talk about both his book, which I've read, which is really, really good as well. But really just try and add knowledge and share some thinking on some new topics that often, this is the whole point, is to learn some experience and actually just introduce you to people that you might not otherwise know. And then just as a common thread, I guess with a lot of people that I tend to speak to, we all seem to have similar interests and backgrounds and stuff as well. We're both alumni of Sheffield University as well, which is another coincidence. So Rob, I'm just going to bring you in. There we go. You're now live.
Hi everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to contribute. I really am looking forward to our conversation.
No, it's a pleasure. I was going to say, because it was actually my wife that I was interested on. I was trying to say, look, who are interesting people to speak to? What guests shall I get on? She was like, I should speak to Rob. So I reached out, and then we had a chat about 2 weeks ago, maybe a bit longer. And it was, you can always tell when it's a good one because the conversation just flows, and actually you had to dash off to a different meeting, but it's always a good sign as opposed to when, it's a little bit different. So would you like to give people just a very quick introduction to who you are before we kind of jump into the detail?
Yeah. So my name's Rob, and I'm the founder of Tailored Thinking, so positive psychology, wellbeing, and HR consultancy. My background, as we'll probably touch upon, has been in HR as a consultant, but also as a professional. I'm the dad of two adventure-loving small children in Durham, and that's it really, I suppose. In terms of the business, as a founder within the business, I've been growing the business for 4.5 years now. So that's kind of where we are with Tailored Thinking.
So just because I'm interested, you also wrote this.
Yes.
What
yes,
point?
I'm an author of a book as well. Yes.
What I was going to say is that because I also do consultancy stuff, we're going straight in at the deep end.
Yeah.
But the roadmap was always a crucial part that I planned years in advance as part of the actual business. Did you do the same, or did you write the book after just almost doing stuff, or how did you kind of come about?
So the way that the short answer to your question, there wasn't a blueprint saying the map's part of a core bit of the strategy that I'm doing. One of the things that I like to do when I'm working with individuals, but I do for myself, is think about adventures. So in terms of one of the things when you think about adventure, it's from a career perspective or from a work or life perspective, you don't know quite what's going to come out of that adventure. You know it's going to be challenging, and you know that you believe in the outcome. So you think the outcome of the adventure will be worthwhile. Mm-hmm. You know there's going to be kind of highs, and you know there's going to be lows, but it's something that will kind of, for most adventures, you'll talk about them afterwards. Like they're things you're proud that you've done. And so my entrepreneurial journey was an adventure, and writing the book was similarly an adventure. So it was something that I was open to. So in terms of doors that I think about, again, about trying to create what kind of doors would I like to open in the future, and maybe nudging opportunities as they presented itself. So kind of relatively early on, and I was talking about job crafting, a few people were saying to me, have you written a book about this, or you could write a book about this? And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And so I just started to explore what that would look like. And again, I very much approached the idea of a book as a bit of an adventure, saying, actually, could I do this? Would I want to do this? What would that kind of look like? And coming back to the idea of a minimum viable product, I wrote a proposal I knew that kind of, I researched the businesses of books in terms of how you can do it. Mm-hmm. And I wrote a proposal to kind of almost convince myself to say, well, if I can't write a proposal for a book, there's no way I'm going to write a book. And so that was a useful experiment in itself. And having done that, and I found that really helpful just to clarify my vision about how I wanted to communicate about this concept to other people. So for anyone listening to this, I found it a really useful kind of exercise in of itself. And then once having done that, I was like, no, actually, I'm quite excited. I'm invested in doing this. And so I looked at a number of different options available. And I was very lucky that Kogan Page saw the proposal, and they were kind of offered me the opportunity to write the book with them. So that's how it happened. So it's small S strategic, I'd say, rather than big S strategic.
But what I find quite interesting is that so I work with a lot of people, and a lot of people that watch this are people that have ambitions to start their own business, already have, and they're looking to grow and develop. And you also get people that are really busy that already have an established like proper business. But the point is, a lot of people are really interested in this. But the thing that I always try and get across is that just start, get your first draft out there. For you, that was writing the proposal. Get feedback, iterate, change, iterate. And it's just funny that I was the same when I was doing my stuff. The more I speak about this every week, it's practice for me, but you get better, and you can really hone down on what kind of is important to you. And then likewise, yes, people can just about see it over your left shoulder where it just says make work better. It's whenever you can get a core message as simple as possible, it shows that you're on something right, which is cool. So one of the things that I like to do is that I love to explore people's journey, because for one, you're going to have people that are younger than we are, all the cool kids, that actually, yes, these go onto YouTube and stuff, but actually you get people that have different career journeys and different character traits. And if we can almost walk through, a bit like what you were like at school, that kind of thing, because what it does, it just helps build the picture of, you and what drives you and how you got to where you are today, in the hope that someone else might see it and think, what, I could do that. So where did you grow up?
So I'm an Essex boy. So I grew up in Billericay, which is a small kind of commuter town in Essex. So it's actually, and famously from Gavin and Stacey, I'm not sure, I think it's Gavin, I might come from Billericay, I'm not sure, it's a claim to fame. And I went to school in Southend on Sea. So I went to, in Essex at the time, I think still the case, there was kind of a grammar school system. So I was lucky enough to go to a grammar school. So that's kind of where I started, and the school kind of basis. And the interesting thing about the school was that, and this probably, I don't know if it set me up or not, but we used to have to get a train. So I was kind of always commuting. I was telling someone about this the other day, and they were kind of horrified by this, but the fact that I used to kind of have to get like a 7:10 train in the morning, and I didn't get home from school till probably about 4:30, 4:45 or something. So it was like a full day relative to other people who kind of come back and it's shorter. And it's not better or worse, it's just what it was. And I didn't know anything different really. But they were quite fun, those train journeys as well, with groups of people going to
what were you like at school? Were you a good kid? Were you a bit naughty, disruptive?
I was thinking, you don't really know until you have to ask other people in terms of their perceptions of you and how they were. I was someone I was quite driven. I've always been relatively driven. I don't know where that's come from. It's never been enforced on me, and I think it's been commended by my parents, but never kind of forced upon me. And I'm very different from my brother, and parents have the same parenting style. So I've always very driven, and kind of always academically, I did pretty well. I was never at the top of the tree kind of academically, and I did pretty well for my GCSEs, where I felt I could just kind of work hard to do it. And I was disappointed in terms of my A-levels. I didn't do quite as well as I wanted to. And it was like, I found at the time that was something that I took quite hard, in the fact that I thought, maybe I'm not as smart as I'd like to be as other people. And I found that as a bit of a stick to beat me with a little bit. That was the chip on my shoulder that I carried through with me. And it's only very recently, I still sometimes find that I worry about kind of intellect and who's clever and not clever in these circumstances, which is
chips are so valuable.
You shouldn't need it, but it's something I think a lot of us do. But I do know that I've got strengths in other areas. So I'm really good if you give me a project to work on, or coursework or those kind of things. I was really good. I was just never great at exams. And the other thing that I was very lucky about my school and school background was that it was very sporting, and lots of the kids kind of played sport, and I was very kind of pretty good at that kind of stuff. So I got to play in school sports teams, and that gave me a sense of a bit of confidence as well, which I think was helpful. So me, again, as an individual growing up, having a sense of identity in terms of saying I was good at some things was really helpful for me as an individual. And I was also kind of house captain, if that means anything to certain groups and things like that. So again, I was interested in, never kind of wanted to kind of be the captain or whatever, but I think I was always recognized as someone who was, in football matches or in hockey matches or whatever, I was always someone who'd shout for other people, like shout loudly, and have the loudest voice in terms of encouraging people. And so because of that, I tended to find myself as in kind of captain positions, not through skill or particular experience, but just because I've my cheerleading capacities and wanting everyone to be at their best. And that's a common theme that's still with me today.
But that's, so I was the same. I was in Cubs and Scouts growing up, and I was a sixer and a seconder and that kind of thing. And again, I was always quite good at sport. And the thing that I still find funny online is I don't know how tall you are. I'm 6'3", and it's just. But the point is, it's when you kind of when I said right at the very start about people with similar values and passions and stuff, you get a lot of entrepreneurs, even reluctant entrepreneurs, but you have that competitiveness that you often get through sport. And one of the big things that I think is especially true for, say, what you do in the HR route, is that so much of a good sports team captain is about other people and really helping lifting other people up, even more so than winning. I think there's I think there's a lot to be said for competitive sports kind of growing up and that kind of thing. And that's why I like to almost highlight some of these things, because I resonate with what you're talking about. But actually, I think it's important that, to identify the traits and how you can learn them and almost still apply them now. So I'm a qualified basketball coach, and I train one of the Newcastle Eagles, like junior teams. But it's almost, for me, it's more about the team and getting people involved and enjoying it over winning games. We still win the games.
Oh, definitely. I feel the sense of camaraderie for me was the thing that, and it still is kind of in teamwork, is the thing that I really enjoy. When the team came together well, and we were supportive of each other and we were really invested, it was just, you can feel it, and you can feel teams that have it and those that don't have it. And I do kind of remember kind of tangibly and tactilely just that sense of mutual support. And again, I think that spills over into all different kind of areas of life. The one thing I would say, though, and I think it's really important to recognize, is if you're listening to this and you're not sporty or others, that doesn't mean to say that you can't do this. It's just a case of saying, these are my strengths and I leaned into them. I suppose these are the things that naturally come to me, and similarly you do, but other people will find the other strengths that they can use to kind of move them forward. I think, but it's helpful for, so sporting perspective, that drive, that sense of connection. They are traits that are helpful in kind of building businesses and entrepreneurship as well.
So did you go to uni?
Yeah, so I went to Loughborough University. So I was very sporty. As a thing, sporty, that was a sports connection. Loughborough was I think still is a very sporty university.
What
I
was
studied
the sport?
Psychology.
I need to know.
So my sport was, in my background is orienteering, so in running. So I was lucky enough when I was younger to compete internationally, and I did, but as a senior as well, for Great Britain, that kind of orienteering. And so Loughborough had a good running and cross country kind of, to be
athletics. Fair, it has good everything. A previous guest is a lady called Charlotte Nichols, who's from Darlington, and she was a swimmer that went to Loughborough. And what was quite funny, so I went to Sheffield, and my first year, and I was captain of the basketball team, first team. But Loughborough were like 2 levels above. They were like the elite level. Literally, it's the GB level of people. Yeah. So it's major props for anyone that does that. But I think partly because I respect that from the sporting perspective, I really appreciate it. As ironically that my nephew, who's 17, 18 now, he goes to uni next September. Loughborough was one of his, I think it was his second pick, and apparently it's really good for engineering, which I'm sure it is, but in my head he's not quite the sportsman, if that makes sense. But realistically, as long as you have a great time, that's all that matters.
I think it's interesting, and again there's some kind of links to work as well here, is that actually Loughborough turned a lot of people off I knew from sport as well, because they went there with and luckily athletics, you could have almost as many people as you wanted to. There wasn't kind of cap. But I know people who are really talented, play county level football, county level kind of hockey, and they went there, and you were saying it's GB level. So all of a sudden they were used to being the best in their team, the best of school, and all of a sudden they weren't making teams, and they got really despondent. And then some of them made second 11s or third 11s, and then those teams were kind of smashing other teams. It wasn't fun, challenging for them. So again, sometimes I think it's around knowing your place and the place where you're going to thrive for yourself, because I think it could be a mistake for some people saying, I'm interested in sport, I'm going to go to there and I'm going to enjoy that, was actually, and this happens in other arenas, I think, in terms of when you go to lots and lots of talented people similar to yourself, you can actually struggle in that environment than thrive, which is counterintuitive, but kind of can make sense on a human level.
Yeah, cool. So what was your first job? I'm trying to think. Basically what we're going to do is build from uni through to tailored thinking. I just,
So my first job was, I did psychology, and my actual first proper job was with HSBC, working in contact center. And I did that purely because I wanted to live in Sheffield, and Sheffield was the mecca for orienteering and running. And so basically my kind of roadmap from that point of view was to find a job to support me to live in Sheffield. And that was it. So I worked in kind of customer services.
And what years were you there, just out of interest?
Pardon?
What years were you in Sheffield?
Oh, I can't remember. They're many times, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And so I'd have graduated. I might have been the same time as you, so or maybe not. So I graduated in, so it was about 2000 to 2006.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, I was in as in
So we would have been in the same city at the same time.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I always find this quite funny that with anyway, we won't go off topic, but the point is I relate to it because a lot of people, I chose Sheffield for one, it's a really big city, it has all the amenities, got the English Institute for Sport, it's got good universities, but it's right on the Peak District as well. So if you're into your orienteering, your sports or water sports or climbing or whatever, it's a brilliant place to.
It's an outdoor city, and it's still got my heart. I live in Durham, I love Durham, but it's just Sheffield's got my heart for that reason. But my first, probably, so that was my first kind of job to support my running. And then once I'd done that for a year and a half, my looking for, say, actually focus more professionally. And my first graduate job was with PricewaterhouseCoopers as an HR consultant. And that's probably more relevant to the tailored thinking journey.
Mm-hmm.
And I really enjoyed consultancy. It was a privilege to work for one of the big four consultancies. You got to work with amazing companies, kind of really high exposure to leaders, and you learn lots. But my frustration from an HR perspective was that you never really got to kind of see things being delivered. You kind of worked with them to develop plans, but you never actually got to operationalize those. And I did my HR qualifications when I was working at PwC, and I had this kind of not down about hankering in the back of my mind that I wasn't actually a proper HR person because I hadn't sacked anyone or I hadn't gone through a disciplinary and grievance stuff. So I didn't doing all the strategy work, but I hadn't done the kind of very practical operational side, transactional side of HR. So having spent 3.5 years at PwC, which I really enjoyed, I then looked to kind of get a practical hands-on role. When that was with a joint venture between British Telecom and Rotherham Borough Council. So there we helped develop a new HR process. They kind of reorganized it across the whole of the council. And I ended up staying and leading in their kind of one of their technical centers of excellence. So I was looking at employee relations and recruitment. So I got really deep experience in those kind of areas. So filled my boots in terms of disciplinaries and employee relations kind of issues there, and looking at recruitment. And so it was really nice to have that really deep operational focus. And I enjoyed, again, interesting as a side note, so as a runner, I was still trying to compete as best as I could and juggle that with working full time. And when I moved to Rotherham, although I was still working the same number of hours, my commute was substantially reduced. So I was previously working in Leeds or in clients all over the place, and I was working longer kind of hours because of that. And my athletic performance rose, probably my best ever for a long time, just by working in a job which was closer to me, that was going to have more stable hours. And it was really interesting to me to see the kind of the hidden benefit of that, or the hidden cost, I suppose, of working really long hours. And you can do it, but it just had a knock-on effect in terms of how I was showing up and able to compete physically. And I had no idea, it was hidden from me, but it was only when I was like, oh, this is interesting. I'm doing kind of more stable hours, more stable commute, and I'm performing better. I mean, it sounds really obvious now, but it wasn't to me at the time.
But I think there's always a difference between the theory, that's what you said before, of what you think, it's obvious, but actually in practice, when you go through and you do hands-on stuff and actually, just for instance, at the moment I was in the office, I'm generally in from like 7:30 in the morning and I'm doing till like 6, but I'm doing it to get over a certain hump, but I know it's not sustainable. But I know that, and I've accepted it. It's to get to a next threshold. Yeah. But you are right. It's easy to get trapped, but it's brilliant to actually feel a real example, so that now you can educate other people. That actually, do you think were you getting more sleep, or did the rest of your life actually change?
I think it's a bit of everything. I think it was more sleep. There was a bit more stability in terms of what I was doing. I say I'm still working really hard, so I still work late hours some days. It wasn't. I'd say my kind of input was the same, but it was just more rhythm and consistency. And I think I'm raising that because, again, it's really interesting, your reflection there, is I think a lot of us cannot feel or see the kind of the cost of the demands that we're facing on our day-to-day life perspective. And it's only sometimes it will kind of pop up and we'll notice it. And often for many of us, it's when we have a negative problem associated with it. And this was an opposite. So I saw a positive outcome from this, and rather than a negative one. But it's often when we feel flat or fatigues or whatever. We don't quite know why, but it's just this big continual build-up of maybe doing things in an unsustainable way without being deliberate about it, in the way that you're saying you're recognizing this is not sustainable, but you're being deliberate about it. So just thought I'd raise that.
That's cool. So then at what point did you start to get the itch to thinking about doing your own thing?
Yeah, so I think I've always had it. I enjoy the consultancy side. So from RBT, I jumped to working at the University of Sheffield, and then from the University of Sheffield, I was offered a job at the University of Melbourne in Australia. So I kind of went to there, and it was in Melbourne that I studied for a master's in positive psychology. So I've done my HR qualifications. I've always been interested in performance from a human level, be that sports or in any area of life, but also within the workplace. And so I was very lucky that I was able to study this at Melbourne, and having done the masters, people started to ask me to kind of pick my brains about some of these ideas, and I started to see opportunities to think about how we could apply the research and science from positive psychology into workplaces that wasn't happening at the time. And so a number of reasons took us back to the UK about 4 or 5 years ago, and it was a case of saying, right, this is an opportunity. So do I go back into a senior HR role that I was kind of doing at the commensurate with what I was doing at the time, or do I try and do something different? And so that was the spark there. It was like, okay, I enjoy consultancy. I enjoy learning about different businesses. I've got an idea. I want to apply something. I want a new adventure effectively. And this is what I'm doing. So it wasn't a big drive, but it's probably always been there a little bit about wanting to make something for myself.
So can I ask, just because it adds context to the story, at the time, did you have a wife or kids, a partner, or was it still just you?
No, so we had one son, my son, so Finn, and my wife. And so in terms of my context, in terms of the situation, we were financially secure enough that I had a kind of really frank conversation with Claire about saying what could we manage from a lifestyle perspective, a kind of income perspective. And we did the calculations because it was really super important to me to feel that I was contributing in a way that I needed to, or that was kind of fair, I suppose, recognizing that this was something that I was investing on by myself, but hopefully for the benefit of the family. And so we had a really frank conversation with it, which was really super helpful for me.
Because that's really super, super brave that my wife has a good job. So actually, like we've always gone 50-50 on everything. Just that's the way we've always done it. But actually, if it went tits up completely, she could cover the mortgage kind of thing. But the point is to do this, because it is stressful and it's expensive, etc. But especially when you've got commitments and family, that's brave. But in a way to be celebrated.
Yeah, I think it is brave. I think you can fetishize that braveness. I feel it was small b brave for me, because I think always kind of the backup could have been to go back into an HR role. So I felt that if it really wasn't going to work, I had a kind of backup plan. It wasn't going to be immediate, but it was there. And the other thing, and this is a bit of a cliche, but another kind of driving point is that I think many parents want their children to be happy and to follow their dreams and do things that matter to them. And it was like really important to me that I can kind of role model that a little bit. So for me, this kind of tailored thinking set up for my business is a way of me kind of role modeling to Finn, and now I've got Evs as well, to them, to showing this is something that I did, and it might not work, that's fine, but I can tell people that my kids are saying this is what what I tried, and this is a way of me following something that I was passionate about, and we've got stories to share there. So that was another driver, is that I wanted to kind of role model those the things that are important to me to other people and to my children as well.
I still think that's super cool, because I think I always said to my wife, remember we were actually sat in Phoenix, and I've been offered quite a well-paying sales job, and in one of the many coffee shops that they have next to the men's clothes section. And I was saying, look, it just doesn't feel right. I think I want to give this consultancy thing a go. But I knew right from the start, I said, look, I'm going to give it my absolute everything. And if it doesn't work, I'm okay with that. But I'm going to do my best. And I think it's what you said is almost, I will happily try and fail if I know that up until today, I've done everything I humanly could. Then suddenly just torpedo me and it was gone. But I think a lot of people are successful, have that mindset where they accept that failure is an option, and there's that 70% chance that it will happen in the first year. that actually you're a lot more pragmatic with your approach to actually execute as well. I also know people that are blind confident that 100% it's going to happen. And I think they get blindsided. So it's nice to hear someone almost acknowledge.
And I was very pragmatic in terms of practical, in terms of what I hoped to achieve, what I needed to achieve, to kind of my commitments to myself and to my family in terms of what I wanted to kind of get to. But it wasn't easy. And I remember there's some car journeys we've had when we were driving to see back from Sheffield. And I remember it was a gloomy day, having the car, and I was feeling low, and I was like, I don't know if this is going to work, Claire. I just don't know. Like, it was early days, and I had self-doubt. And she, to Claire's credit, she said, well, I think you absolutely will. Think about what you have achieved in terms of doing this. And I go back to that now, person in the car, and it's not laughable, but you kind of like, it's, if only you could see how things will develop. But it's definitely, no matter how pragmatic, no matter how things are, I definitely had.
How far into your journey was that?
So probably 3, 4, 5 months in terms of that time, in terms of some wins, some not wins. And it was just I think the challenging for me in terms of, particularly for the consultancy work, where you're building on developing networks, relationships, and you need to, from a consultant, you need 3 things to happen. You need someone to want to work with you. You need someone to have the budget to be able to work with you, and someone to have the business need to work with you. And you need all those 3 things to come together at the same time. And you might have one, but not the other. And so it takes time for those things to align. And I think it was just a sense of, at the time, was I couldn't control what was the business that was going to come to me, if that makes sense. I could control meeting people all the time, and I enjoyed that. And I could control networking, learning about business and putting things out there, but I couldn't control the stuff that was coming in. And I was just having concerns at that point in time, saying, I can't see that. I don't know what it's going to look like, and because I hadn't done it before. So I had no roadmap, for your example. I had ideas, but I didn't know what it felt like.
But I think just being honest and talking about it, like, 'cause I had the same, and I teach people how to do this, but it was almost that I had my first 2 clients. First client was, ironically, was in New York. That was before I even set up. Then I got 2 really quick wins. Then it was quiet for a bit, and by 6 months, I then had sustainable retained income. But my path was exactly the same. But the reason why I like to talk about this is because there will be people that might see this who are currently 4 months in, thinking, "Oh fuck, the work's not coming in. I'm not getting the leads. I'm worried about." And if all they ever see online is people saying, "Oh, it was brilliant. Yeah, I do this in 23 countries." It's not the true picture. So I always like to talk about my journey, because actually there will be someone out there. And that's why it was great to hear yours.
Again, I think depending on your mindset, and I think it's really important to be self-aware in terms of, this is why I kind of talk. I'm very lucky with Claire that I can be kind of open with her, and I challenge myself, and I'm aware of story. I think very much of what story am I telling myself now? So I knew in that car, so my telling it's a very negative story. That's not right or wrong, but that was the reality. And so a story, depending on your frame of mind, if you're in a positive story, I can look at LinkedIn and be super excited and proud for everyone doing their stuff. It's like, this is great. Everyone's doing, like, people I know, my connections are doing really well. That's great. Another day and this doesn't happen very often, luckily enough, but it does happen, where you're telling yourself a story saying, these things aren't working to me. Everyone's doing so much better. I should be doing more. I'm not good. Depending on what story you're telling yourself will be how you interact with the world and the information that you see and share. And I think it's really useful to be aware of that as well.
Oh, cool. So with this being a business growth strategy podcast, would you like to what does the business do? Almost, a quick pitch.
So I talk a little about the business. So the business, when I set it up, was to around saying, how can I apply ideas from positive psychology, performance psychology, and well-being science to workplaces? So actually, how can I be the bridge between those aspects? And so the work that I do is around consultancy. So in terms of supporting organizations if they're doing things such as values or behavior work, is a theme that's kind of, I'm doing some work with performance management reviews or performance reviews and check-ins, and how people can do hybrid working well. They're the kind of things that I can consult and support people on. And also in terms of training and development. So in terms of how we can kind of train leadership teams, or individuals to learn kind of skills, be aware of concepts that they can apply to make their work better, to come back to this idea is around make work better, make better work. That's my kind of my focus in a research applied way.
I think it's super interesting, because again, one of the things from a business point of view that investors look for if they're looking to invest into a startup or whichever is that what's the problem and why you and why now. But you obviously have unique experience that not everyone has, that gives you that, the drive. One of the big things we always look at is how do we make sure that someone's own entrepreneurial journey, there is something that is unique there that they can really own. And you definitely kind of have that space. So can we jump on to job crafting, which is something I know that you've spoken about before?
Yeah, sure. So my kind of positive psychology wellbeing, that's kind of relatively niche, as it were, but my super niche kind of area that I'm super geeky and interested and passionate about is a concept called job crafting. So when I was in a lecture in the University of Melbourne, someone was introducing this concept to me and they were saying this is an idea that basically when people will shape their jobs or personalize their jobs in a way that kind of bring out their strengths, align to their interests and what they do, not kind of radically redesigning their jobs, but doing it in small ways, people tend to perform better, they're more engaged, it buffers stress, it supports well-being, people report higher career satisfaction and growth. And by the way, there's 150 peer-reviewed papers written about job crafting to back this up with evidence. And I'd never heard this. As someone who was kind of interested in this kind of space, it was just something that I'd never heard of or been aware of before. So I heard this in the lecture theatre. I immediately wanted to apply this. So I went out at the University of Melbourne at the time and I designed some workshops saying, right, I'm going to bring this concept to life, see if it works. And we had to, I had to kind of stop. I didn't ask permission to do it. I just went and did this in my lunch hour and said the sessions were titled How to Make Your Job Better. That was it, or Happier at Work or something like that. And I had to stop doing it once we had 200 odd people sign up and refer other people to come to it, because it was getting a bit out of control for me. And I think I mentioned to you, Steve, one of the earlier on, we had a session where I literally had a rocket scientist, like an academic rocket scientist, next to a cleaner, next to an IT technician on the table, talking about how they could apply these kind of concepts. So I was like, people get this. They kind of understand when their work does align to what they do and doesn't align. And so since then, I've been exploring about actually how you can bring this to life with the organization. So actually, how can you apply this? Mm-hmm. And I've also been studying this in the wild. So I'm interested in talking to people who are understanding how people actually job craft in practice. And so that's job crafting.
So if we can give an example, if we could, I think it'll just help cement it. And actually, when we spoke last time, what was quite funny was that we're talking about me in some ways. That like I'm an engineer by trade, so I love solving problems. But I've always been into my tech. I love my cameras. I love my lights. I love talking to people. I love being creative. And it was you that actually said that almost knowingly or not, I'd crafted a business around the stuff that I love. And I think what's quite interesting is that I think you've heard of the phrase ikigai, which is similar. And it was just, if you can almost give an explanation, but what I think people find interesting is to really kind of give an example, and then almost people might think, well, actually, how could I apply it, if that's cool? Sure.
So the first starting point is around starting small. So we're not talking about ripping out your job description or setting fire to your role profile, which might be fun, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about actually how you can make your job maybe 1% better next week. And so I encourage people to think about what's something they can play with or experiment with that takes them maybe 10, 15 minutes a day or an hour a week or something to do things. And what I would encourage you to anyone who's listening is thinking about what are the things that maybe give you energy, or what are the things that you drain your energy. And from the job crafting perspective, what I try to think about is saying, is there a way you can dial down the things that take away energy from you, or dial up the things that you do? So the example that we talked about a little bit, and maybe this relates to, I'll give it a tangible example of a workshop last week. So what I tend to do is run workshops where I encourage people to job craft, then come back a month later to kind of hear how people got on, share stories about successes. And I think those stories are really powerful because I encourage more people to do this. And one person there was working as an HR person, and they were saying one of the things they're interested in, and it reminds me of you in terms of just discussing this, was that they used to have to give updates of meetings around policies and procedures and other things. And they were they've been working from home, being more aware of digital tools. And they were thinking, could I do something different here? So I'm going to record a little video. And so they did this purely because it was something they thought would be fun and interesting. They were kind of interested in tech. Yeah. But the problem they had was around sharing information to their colleagues. So they just recorded a video update, like 2 minutes about a policy change, rather than sending an email and doing it the next agenda. And then they sent it out to their group that they supported. And they found that had a couple of outcomes. Not only did they enjoy that process, learning a new skill effectively in terms of their creativity about video editing and doing things, but the people they serve, the business, people actually listened to it, and they came back and said, that was really fun that you did that kind of video, and I actually listened to it. And to be honest with you, Rob, it wasn't Rob, but it was the best. I don't always listen to the update. I go and tune out when you kind of talk at the meetings. And another kind of consequence of that was that someone in the learning and development team picked up on the fact through a conversation that this person had recorded these videos, and we're like, well, why don't we do that for some of our other training and development? So this person then now has a bigger opportunity to kind of do that type of work in that organization. And it purely started from a small experiment of trying to make kind of their job more interesting. And another tangible example that people can do is around looking at maybe how they run meetings, say. So today we had a session with some people, and we were talking about different styles of meetings, saying they're purposeless and they're very kind of full and other things. And it's like, well, let's go back to basics in terms of first principle. What's the purpose of that meeting? What can you do differently? And we talked about silent meetings, or we talked about maybe having ones where you're making sure that you've got taking it in turns to run the agenda, or just thinking about how you can do existing things in a different way to kind of to make them better, to experiment with things. Often we get, as humans, we're very good at doing things in a very repetitive way. It's comfortable for us. And there's good reason for doing it. But what I want to do for job crafting is saying, are you working in a way that's optimal to you? And if not, how can you make your work better?
I think the video one's a great example, because it's just, people often people enjoy doing stuff, whatever the stuff is. It could be cycling, it could be creative, it could be photography, it could be creative, anything. And you are right. It's those subtle tweaks where you can almost do more of it for your day-to-day job that actually give you a bit more fulfillment and ownership and stuff. And I just think it's a really interesting concept. Have you ever had people almost challenge it to say it'll never work, and you've been able to almost overcome it or prove it?
Yeah, sure. And I think it's really helpful to have that skepticism. In my perspective, skepticism good, because you mean you've engaged with the concept. I'd rather have skepticism than ambivalence. So I'd rather have someone either interested or not. And what I tend to do for that, to counteract that, is two things. One is that people job craft anyway. So when people personalize their jobs, they'll find ways to improve the jobs. And people are just doing it secretly. So most organizations, when you kind of, again, survey people are doing this. They're just doing it in a hidden way. They don't want to talk about it because it kind of suits them, but maybe doesn't suit the business. So it's, from my perspective, from a business perspective, saying, well, why don't we actually do this in plain sight, in a way that works for individuals and the organization? Mm-hmm. The second thing is around actually encouraging people to, when they do it openly, they tend to do it in positive and constructive ways. So it tends to do it in a way that benefits other people. And when you the other way to kind of challenge this is that I often get people to test and experiment with groups. So I often, when I'm with an organization, rather than saying, let's go big bang and do everyone, let's actually just test this. And let's test this find some skeptics, let's find some supporters, and let's find some neutral. So that could be, I don't know why, but the engineers or the IT team or the legal team tend to be the skeptics. The HR team seem to be the kind of the cheerleaders of the processes generally, and it could be another group that's neutral. And then saying, actually, let's test whether this works for those groups. So rather than going big bang, saying let's collect some evidence. And if you are an organization, if you're a leader that's genuinely interested in performance, you can't ignore the personal side of things. It's like, if you look at the world, we can personalize every aspect of our lives, from our cars to our clothes to our coffee shops to you name it, we can personalize it. And we are deluding ourselves if we don't think there's benefits of bringing that personalization to work. But I think a lot of leaders are just scared of that, because it involves ceding control and trusting their colleagues in a way that maybe they're just not ready for.
But I think what's quite interesting is that I think often the benefits could be hidden. Prime example, someone's in a job and they choose to leave the job and you've lost the person. Actually, just a little bit of ownership or control might mean that they stay in the job longer, but the leader will never know, because you don't know the opportunity cost of whether you did or didn't do it. But some of it, I imagine, is just the gut feel on, I think it's going to work, or I'm willing to try it. and see if it works. So it's cool. I'm very conscious.
Such a great observation. Really, really spot on.
But I know how busy you are. And actually, I've got loads of questions to do with the book and lots of different things. And we won't go into too much detail. But if you're interested in anything Rob's talked about, you can find this online. Where's the best I would say, where's the best place for someone to buy it from? Can they get it from your website?
So the best thing, you can buy it in all good on evil bookshops. That doesn't matter to me at all. So I think anywhere they can find it. And if they Google personalization at work, they can find a summary of the book. And tailoredthinking.co.uk is a good spot for finding out more about job crafting and some of the concepts that we've talked about today.
No, it's cool. I just don't want to keep you talk. I know how busy you are, so it's just we could talk for ages. Just out of interest, what is the dream for the business? Have you ever actually mapped this out to almost think about what is the absolute pinnacle?
I do. It's interesting. I do, and it kind of changes, as it were. And I think it's helpful to. I think it's helpful to keep your head up, to think about where you want to go and what the opportunities to do. So at the moment, the idea is to my current dream, as it were, to have a size where we would be a small consultancy of say 15 people. So in terms of 10 to 15 people, and where we are working with organizations to make tangible difference in terms of making work better. And one of the things that's important to me is around creating opportunities for great work for people as well interested in this space, because I want to not just support other organizations to do it, I want to do it for myself. So we've got 2 employees at the moment. So we're on it's a slow journey. We're hoping to recruit for a couple more posts this year. So we're on the right trajectory to do that. Why 10 to 15 people? Don't know. I think that's my reaction today, and maybe in 5 years' time we can check in and see where I am and how far away I am from that.
See, what's quite funny. So for me, my plan is to work 4 days a month. I joke with people, this is the plan. So everything I'm trying to do is to build a machine that, yes, you can hit a lot of people via streaming and whatever, but actually where it's kind of just me, maybe 1 or 2 other people, but almost that's what I'm trying to build, because for me, I know what I'm like, that I would worry too much about paying other people's wages and bills and mortgages and stuff.
Yeah.
That actually, that's not what I want to build. So ironically, although I want to build a big business, not physically big, it would just be scaled and that kind of thing. But it's almost, I think what again is interesting is because you have a great niche, you've got knowledge, you've got expertise, you've actually got a book, which is fantastic. And then almost, do you think through how you do your like strategic promotion? Because I know you're a TEDx speaker. How did you find that?
So I found the TEDx was an amazing opportunity. Really hard, again, as an adventure. It was definitely an adventure for me in terms of the good, bad bits. Really proud that I've done it. The TEDx was really useful as a mechanism to, again, think about how you're expressing your message and the sentiments you want to get across to a specific audience in a broader way than maybe the book was intended. So it's another audience, an opportunity to connect with another audience. And it's a very helpful mechanism for in terms of job crafting. I've got a 10-minute TED talk. I've got a 300-page book, so you can find anywhere in between for those different kind of reference points. So for me, it was useful from that. But it was, again, it was something that I potentially could see wanting to do. It was nothing that I was desperate to do to the business. It was seeking out opportunities and being interested in it in the same way as the book, rather than saying I need to do this to get to the next level, to unlock this. It's around, I've got lots of these little things that I'd love to do. And I will just try and pounce upon those opportunities when they create. One thing I am, again, good at is around, if I want something to happen, I'm generally pretty good at somehow finding out a way to make it happen somehow. And not immediately, but I tend to get there somehow in some way. So I find it's useful to have these kind of goals or ideas around that I'm hoping to work towards.
That's very cool, because I ask selfishly, just because one of the big things that with version 2 when I launch it and obviously updated is to actually start to write to and email conference organizers, because I think the more you can visualize the idea of what your dream life is. So we've gone a bit cheesy, but I just think, because you don't often get to talk about this. I would love to be a British Simon Sinek, where you get to speak on big stages and travel the world. I'd love to do that. I still love hands-on, rolling my sleeves up, actually doing stuff, but it's almost, if I just hope that that'll happen, it won't happen. And so one of the things that I'm hoping to do is start to send out packs to basically Google conference organizers for business strategy related stuff. There's the whole I gift away more than 50% of all the courses, that kind of thing. And just actually, but it's through the action of knowing what it is that I'm trying to achieve, will I actually, touch some wood, hopefully achieve it. And it's just because you have the book, you have that. And some people, I guess, have the edge, or some people hate public speaking. But it was just, what's interesting is that you have the chat up line, the opener, to approach almost anyone in the world to say, look, this is me, if you would like to have a conversation. And it's for a business point of view, it's priceless, because it just opens up so many more doors than if you didn't have that, if that makes sense.
Firstly, I've got no doubt that you'll be seeing her on the stage, and in terms of more stages too, I've got no doubt about that. I think one thing's helpful for me that has been useful is around actually speaking to conference organizers, speaking to people who organize TEDx's, speaking to publishers. So trying to think about how you can make their life easier. So in terms of I think often we don't do that. We kind of assume that we know how to get someone's attention or kind of to do this. And actually what I often ask conference organizers or from some of the TEDx kind of people I contacted people again, without thinking I'm going to pitch a TEDx thing. I started to reach out to people and say, I've seen you've organised this TEDx. Can I just have a conversation about how does the recruitment process work? What do you look for from you? And I had those conversations a year and a half ago too. And again, it wasn't like, right, I'm now going to pitch you. It was around saying, I need to understand how that works. And similarly,
you were still savvy enough to do it.
It was around getting that proposal, like saying, actually, what does a proposal look like? So to making it easy for other people.
But that in itself is clever, and it's that ingenuity of making stuff happen. I think a lot of people, they just hope it's going to happen, and it's just, I can't express enough how important it is to write people and say, can I be a guest on the podcast? Can I do this? Can I do that? Can I do that? And I think for me, it's almost I'm proud of what I've done, but I know what I'm trying to do. And at that point, but it's the game. And I love checking in with people, just because in another 6 months, I have one guy that every year when we set up at the same time, and he's got a spice business. His name's Pete McKeown. They're called Diablo Seasonings. And in November, we have a catch up about how the year went. And I said to him, one of the big things for me, which will be an absolute dream goal, is that I remember when I was earlier on in my career and I was on a flight somewhere, but it was like a businessy trip type thing. And I'd flick through the in-flight magazine, and some of them were business education adverts for MBAs and stuff. And I said to him last November, a big goal for me would be to have my own advert in an in-flight magazine. That for me would be like, but the irony is, it's just, I could technically do it now, but I'm not ready. But for me, I don't know about you, I treat this whole thing as a game. I don't, I do take it seriously, but I also don't, if that makes sense. And it's you've got a certain amount of chips, you allocate them as you can. And
and I think that's with your game. My wording is adventure. It's like in that perspective, in terms of like, there's going to be highs, there's going to be lows, there's going to be losses. You don't know, you can't guarantee who's going to win the game or kind of where you're going to get to from your adventure. But as long as you enjoy the game and as long as you enjoy the adventure, then it doesn't matter really. And I think that's I think so important to be able to kind of check in, actually, why am I doing this, and am I enjoying it? So I think I think it's a great analogy.
I think for me, it's a way to make it less serious.
Yeah.
You could easily frame it in a way that petrifies you to get out of bed in the morning, or what's the worst that happens? And that for me is just, it's the big thing that I always try and get across, is that, my viewpoint now compared to when I first set up as a consultant was 2 years ago. It was October 19. And since then we've had COVID and stuff. But the point is, it's just keep going, keep learning. And that's almost the fun of it. So I am conscious of time now. So I have 3 questions that I kind of ask, just to kind of help wrap up. But for me, almost in some ways, it's the most interesting bit. The first one is, if you're happy to, can you share the best piece of advice you've ever had?
Yeah, I was looking at this. I haven't got like kind of really clear things. 2 things stuck in my mind though. That was when I was setting up the business. Again, I had conversations with people about how it worked and the people I admired and what I looked at. And someone said to me, overnight success takes 5 years. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. What do you mean by that? And he said, well, actually, it takes time to build up those opportunities. And as I said, those 3 things need to align: the need, the resources, and the interest in working with you. And I think a lot of that then is around actually being around for the work when it turns up. So I think in terms of, and I'm now in a position that in terms of our capacity, in terms of the busyness of the business, that I just couldn't, people talked about, but I couldn't tangibly kind of feel 3 years ago. It just didn't, because it was so far away from where I was to where I am now. So that kind of, I think that stuck with me. And again, having a bit of a long-term vision in terms of what's going on. So maybe I'll stop there. Actually, that's a good maybe piece of advice that I've held on to.
I think it's spot on. Do you have a business that you see almost that you want to replicate or copy, or doing something similar to what you've done that you kind of see the model?
No, I don't think so. I wouldn't say there's a model that I'm aspiring to be the equivalent of this or that. I do. There's a lot of people that I admire working in this space, and I would see them as kind of. I try and approach as collaborators rather than competitors, if that makes sense. And so there's lots of those, but there's no one that I'm saying I'm going to base my model on this.
Because are you obviously? I know you're a sportsman. Do you know Peloton?
Yes. Yeah.
So one of the things I really respect about Peloton is that now they did $1.2 billion in revenue last year. And they didn't, in theory, do anything which was that revolutionary. They just took live stream classes to a very high level into people's homes and made it slick and easy and stuff. But now it seems obvious that they're so successful. It took them 3 years from when they first launched to actually kind of do anything or take off, and this is a company that now does $1 billion. So it just lines up exactly with what you're saying, that what I'm trying to do longer term is to create the Peloton of business education, but it's the same kind of look, feel, style, but that is where I'm aiming for. So I love to, there's some really good articles online where you can see how other people float and what they did, and then learn from it, if that makes sense. But I'm always fascinated about what people have done.
And I think that's a really nice way of looking at it. And again, I'm one of the podcasts I listen to, an avid podcast listener, and How I Built This and other podcasts that talk about how business has developed, and something that I'm fascinated by in terms of hearing people's stories and how they did it.
Because I watched one with the chap that launched Moonpig. So it was it was a Stephen Bartlett interview, and I'll be honest, I know a lot of people love him, and I wasn't sure. I don't know. I just wasn't sure. But actually, the more I'm watching the stuff, the more I actually like him now. But anyway, it was and Nick Jenkins, and he was basically saying how difficult it was. And bear in mind, they're now at $1.6 billion in revenue. And it's in theory a no-brainer for their business model about how it's clever and how it works and stuff. But they again had 5 years. Like, people ask him, obviously I'm paraphrasing the interview, people ask him, did you ever have a rough patch at Moonpig? And he says, yes, we had one. But it lasted from 2010 to 2015. As in, it was a 5-year rough patch. But the point is, even now, companies that are super, super successful, everyone almost goes through that. And it's people often forget, or they have short memories. And even Apple had tough times. And but I like to learn from it and model it. And anyway, that
makes a lot of sense. That makes complete sense to me. And again, I think for me personally, I find hearing stories from other people is really helpful. The one thing I think is really helpful to tell myself, though, is that you're only hearing about the stories that have been successful. So sometimes you can fetishize the kind of some of the stories, but you don't hear about the ones that got to a similar point and didn't work for them. And I think you can probably learn even more from those that you do from the successes. So I think that's just useful to have in the back of your mind as well when you're listening to this stuff.
I must say, you're probably talking 95%, if not 99% of the stories you never hear.
Yes,
that's a very good point. My next question is that if you were to give advice to your younger self, so this could be Rob at school, it could be in Melbourne, it could be at Sheffield, it could be whichever, what would it be? Or it could even be Rob in the car that one time.
Yeah, I think I'm someone, although it's interesting positive, I think take things quite seriously, and I spend a lot of time kind of in my own head. And I don't think there's an advice. I think probably to be a bit kinder to myself. I think in terms of would be the advice that I think my current Rob still says this to me now. Like, and again, I'm aware of it, but I struggle with it. So I think in terms of there being the kind of stuff, and I think so I think just being kinder, I think to myself, and I think that's I think a lot of people can hear that. I think the difficulty, the challenge is actually then taking action upon it. Again, a lot of these things is easy to recognize, but then what do you do with that, and how do you what do you do practically to apply that?
But I think just people will take value hearing this, and as I do, almost I'm completely selfish. At just every interview, actually, I learn something. So that's the only reason. But I think it's true that, you know, especially if it's a smaller team, you can get trapped and you worry and you do things. But actually, the interview on Thursday, a lady called Katie was talking about stoicism, and anyway, but we were talking about how actually just what advice would you give your best friend in the same example? We're all very, very critical on ourselves, but actually, I think we're very harsh on ourselves. So I think it's very true. Is there anything you would like to talk about or plug before we go?
No, I don't think so. I think people can find me on Tailored Thinking. I think one thing I would say to the business, into the development, that I'm not quite ready to talk about yet, but one of the things that I'm interested in is around thinking about what are things that get in the way of people doing great work within the workplace. And one of the things that I think is ripe for change is a job description and role profiles, and how they actually are kind of like a negative power in businesses in terms of boxing people in. And so that's something that I'm exploring, and we'll be offering some alternative approaches, but we're not quite there yet to talk about them.
Well, I look forward to hearing it. I thank you genuinely for your time. I think it's been really, really interesting. This obviously gets clipped up and goes into YouTube and that kind of thing. And the thing that I love is the fact that is online in theory permanently now. So in 2 years' time or 5 years' time, you could look back at where you are now and almost see the growth and the potential and that kind of thing. And that for me is almost part of the journey, that this is it's a video journal of that kind of thing. But no, it's been a pleasure to kind of meet and talk and stuff, and hopefully we'll stay in touch.
No, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, and I'm an admirer of the work you're doing and your ambitions, and the commitment and the consistency of what you do.
That's the hard bit. But the thing is, when you said before about the schedule, it's in the words of Tony Robbins, it's a new standard I've set myself.
Yeah.
But it's almost if people know that I'm that committed, that I show up every week regardless, if we work together, the hope is that I fulfill the same trait, you know, as opposed to you get some people that do one once. And but I enjoy it. That's the main thing. So I've tried to craft my own job, and that's why I really enjoyed reading this as well, which I definitely recommend to everyone. This is actually my wife's copy, I won't lie, but still. But no, so it's been a pleasure. Thank you genuinely for your time. I know your phone rang as well, so I'm going to let you go. But no, I appreciate it, and hopefully we'll stay in touch.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.
All right, cheers, Rob. Bye-bye.